The digital clock on my nightstand flashed 12:03 a.m. as I stood at my Kitwoo window, staring out at the identical rows of HDB flats stretching into Singapore's humid darkness. Even at midnight, scattered lights dotted the concrete landscape like earthbound stars. Behind each illuminated window was another life, perhaps another teacher like me, grading papers well into the night, wondering if any of it mattered. I sipped my lukewarm tea and returned to the stack of science quizzes from my primary 4 class. 23 more to grade before morning. My red pen hovered over Wong Lee's paper, but my mind wandered to the same question that had been surfacing more frequently during these midnight sessions. Is this all there is to my life? At 34, I had achieved exactly what was expected of me. Good university, first-class honors from NTU, stable career, 12 years at Riverside Primary School, respectable position, youngest department head in the school's history, perfect performance reviews every single year. I should have felt fulfilled. Instead, I felt like I was slowly disappearing into a maze of expectations I could never fully meet. My phone buzzed with a message from Principal Lim. Meeting tomorrow regarding Brandon Tan. His attendance issues are escalating. Please bring documentation of previous interventions. I set down my pen, exhaustion weighing on my shoulders like a physical burden. Brandon was one of my brightest students, but lately he'd been skipping school regularly. When he did attend, his eyes were vacant, his normally curious mind seemingly elsewhere. I had tried everything, extra attention, modified assignments, calls home, even visiting his flat personally to speak with his grandmother. Nothing worked. My failure with Brandon felt personal, a manifestation of my growing inadequacy as a teacher. The principal's increasing scrutiny only confirmed what I already suspected. I was losing my edge, the very thing that had defined me since childhood. My parents had sacrificed everything for my education. Dad worked double shifts at the shipyard, while Mum cleaned offices at night, so I could attend enrichment classes. Education is the only way up, they'd always said. You must be better than everyone else to succeed. And I had been. Valedictorian in secondary school. President of the English Literature Society. Full scholarship to university. I'd built my entire identity around being exceptional, perfect, unbreakable. Now, staring at these ungraded papers at midnight, I felt like the most ordinary person in Singapore, and that terrified me more than any failure ever could. The next morning, I arrived at Riverside Primary 30 minutes early, as I had every day for 12 years. The empty hallways echoed with my footsteps as I made my way past colorful student artwork and motivational posters. My classroom on the 3rd floor was my sanctuary, perfectly organized, every resource cataloged, bulletin boards updated weekly. I was arranging the day's materials when Melanie Wu burst through my door, her usual energy filling the space. Mei-Lin, thank goodness you're here early. Did you hear about the new education reforms? She clutched a thick folder to her chest, eyes bright with a mixture of excitement and panic. They're completely restructuring the assessment criteria. Everything we've been doing for the past 5 years is about to change. My stomach dropped. More changes, more adaptation required. At what point would I stop being able to keep up? When do they take effect? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady while my mind raced through implications. Next semester, which means we have exactly 8 weeks to completely overhaul our teaching methods, assessment strategies, and reporting systems. Melanie plopped into the chair beside my desk, spreading papers everywhere. I'm actually excited about it. Fresh start, you know, chance to innovate. I nodded, but inside I felt like the foundation of my professional life was shifting beneath my feet. I'd spent years perfecting my systems, creating resources, building my reputation on consistency and excellence. Now they wanted me to start over? Oh, and there's more, Melanie continued, oblivious to my internal panic. They're implementing peer review assessments. Every teacher will be observed and evaluated by colleagues 3 times this semester. Peer review. The words came out sharper than I intended. Transparent accountability. Melanie quoted from the document. Teachers observing teachers to ensure best practices. She looked at me with concern. You okay? You look pale. Before I could answer, my phone rang. The school office. Miss Tan. Principal Lim needs to see you immediately about the Brandon Tan situation. There's been a development. The meeting with Principal Lim felt like being summoned for execution. I sat across from her polished desk, my folder of Brandon's work and intervention documentation clutched in my hands. Principal Lim's office was immaculate, awards lining the walls, motivational quotes in elegant frames, a small Singapore flag positioned perfectly beside her computer. Brandon's missed 17 days this quarter. She began without preamble, her tone sharp with disapproval. His parents are threatening to transfer him to another school. They feel his teacher isn't providing adequate support. The words hit me like physical blows. 12 years of perfect evaluations, and now parents were questioning my competence. I've implemented every intervention strategy in our handbook, I said, my voice smaller than I intended. I've stayed after school to tutor him personally. I've called home multiple times. I even visited his flat last week to speak with his grandmother. Obviously, it's not enough. Principal Lim opened Brandon's file with sharp movements. His test scores have dropped 20% since last semester. His engagement level has plummeted. The parents are asking specifically to have him moved to Mrs. Wang's class. Perhaps, Principal Lim continued, you're trying too hard. Sometimes students respond better to different approaches. What does that mean exactly? It means I'm transferring Brandon to Mrs. Wang's class, effective immediately. Perhaps a fresh perspective will help. I walked back to my classroom in a daze, each step echoing in the empty hallway like a countdown to professional failure. 12 years of teaching, and I couldn't even help one struggling student. What kind of teacher was I? That afternoon I watched Brandon pack his desk supplies with a mixture of relief and shame that made me sick to my stomach. He moved mechanically, not making eye contact with me or his classmates. Brandon, I said quietly, as he shouldered his backpack, I want you to know that I believe in you. Sometimes change is good. He looked at me then, and for a moment I saw something flicker in his eyes, confusion, maybe even sadness. But he just nodded and left. Without a word, the rest of my class watched the drama unfold with the keen perception children possess. They knew something significant had happened, even if they didn't understand the implications. Miss Tan. Little Priya raised her hand tentatively. Are you sad? 28 pairs of eyes looked at me expectantly. I could have deflected, maintained my professional composure, given them the everything is fine response I'd perfected over the years. Instead, I said, yes, Priya, I am sad, but sometimes sad feelings help us grow. The first peer evaluation came 2 weeks later without warning. I was in the middle of explaining photosynthesis when Mrs. Lim from Primary 5 slipped into my classroom with her clipboard and evaluation forms. The students noticed immediately, their attention shifting from my lesson to the mysterious visitor taking notes. I tried to continue normally, but my voice sounded strained even to my own ears. Plants use sunlight to create their own food, I explained, pointing to my carefully prepared diagram. This process is called photosynthesis. Miss Tan, Aiden interrupted. Why is that lady writing about us? She's observing our lesson, I replied, shooting a quick glance at Mrs. Lim, who was scribbling furiously on her form. Let's focus on the plants, shall we? But the damage was done. The class was distracted, my rhythm was broken, and what should have been a smooth, engaging lesson became stilted and awkward. Mrs. Lim left after 45 minutes, with a polite nod and pages of notes I would never see. That evening, I stayed at school until nearly 9 o'clock, reorganizing my entire classroom library and updating bulletin boards that didn't need updating. Anything to avoid going home to the emptiness of my HDB flat, where I would sit alone with my growing sense of inadequacy. The security guard, Mr. Gronk, knocked on my door around 9:30. Miss Tan, you should go home. Building closes soon. Just finishing up, I said, not looking up from the books I was arranging by reading level for the third time that day. Teacher, you stay too late every night. This not healthy. His broken English carried a kindness that almost brought tears to my eyes. Work always here tomorrow. But you must rest. Walking to my car in the humid Singapore evening, I passed the mosque where Mr. Gronk would go for evening prayers. The sound of the call to prayer drifted across the parking lot, a haunting melody that spoke of something beyond the daily grind of achievement and failure. When had I stopped believing in anything beyond my own performance? The scandal broke on a Tuesday morning in early October. I was setting up for my primary 4 class when Melanie burst into my classroom, her face pale with shock. Mei-Lin, have you seen the morning news? I shook my head, focused on arranging the day's science materials. Brandon Tan, your former student, he's been arrested. The box of microscope slides slipped from my hands, clattering to the floor. What? Drug possession. They found him in a void deck yesterday night with a group of older boys. The news is calling it a concerning trend of academic pressure, driving students to destructive behavior. I sank into my chair, the room spinning around me. Brandon, 13 years old, arrested for drugs. There's more, Melanie continued gently. His parents are claiming that the stress of changing classes midterm contributed to his instability. They're considering legal action against the school. Legal action for inadequate support and harmful educational practices. Melanie sat on the edge of my desk. Mei-Lin, I'm so sorry. This isn't your fault, but it felt like my fault. If I'd been a better teacher, maybe Brandon wouldn't have struggled. If I'd found the right approach, maybe he wouldn't have been transferred to another class. If I'd connected with him better, maybe he wouldn't have ended up in a void deck with drugs. The what-ifs spiraled through my mind like a tornado, destroying everything I thought I knew about teaching, about helping children, about my purpose in life. The emergency staff meeting that afternoon was worse than I'd imagined. Principal Lim stood at the front of the faculty lounge, her usual composed demeanor replaced by barely controlled stress. 2 representatives from the Ministry of Education sat beside her, their serious expressions leaving no doubt about the gravity of the situation. As you're all aware, Principal Lim began, we're facing a crisis that threatens our school's reputation and our students' well-being. The media attention surrounding Brandon Tan's arrest has raised questions about our support systems and teaching practices. She gestured toward the MOE representatives. Mr. Lowe and Miss Kaur are here to conduct a comprehensive review of our procedures, particularly regarding struggling students and classroom management. My throat felt like it was closing. Every eye in the room seemed to be looking at me, though I knew that was probably my imagination. All teachers will be individually interviewed about their interactions with Brandon Tan, Miss Kaur announced. We need to understand exactly what support was provided and why it was insufficient. After the meeting, I sat in my car in the school parking lot, hands shaking as I tried to process what was happening. My teaching career, my entire world was under investigation. Brandon's life was falling apart. The media was scrutinizing our school's practices. I drove aimlessly through Singapore's orderly streets, past shopping centers where families enjoyed normal lives, past HDB estates where children played safely in void decks, past churches where people found comfort in something beyond themselves. The investigation lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of interviews, documentation reviews, and media scrutiny that made every day at school feel like walking through quicksand. The interview with the MOE representatives was brutal. Miss Tan, Mr. Lowe read from his notes, Brandon's parents have stated that you showed favoritism toward higher achieving students and made him feel inadequate. How do you respond to this allegation? That's not true, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. I treated all students equally. According to their statement, you repeatedly called attention to his struggles in front of other students and made him feel singled out. Miss Kaur's pen hovered over her notepad. They say this contributed to his withdrawal and eventual acting out. Had I done that? In my frustration with his declining performance, had I somehow made Brandon feel worse about himself? The memory of calling on him repeatedly when I knew he hadn't done his homework now felt cruel rather than motivational. I was trying to engage him, I whispered. Sometimes, Mr. Lowe said, his tone not unkind. Our intentions don't match our impact. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. I was cleaning out my desk drawer when I found an email I'd somehow missed from 3 months ago. It was from the Ministry of Education, forwarding a letter that had been sent to them before the scandal broke. Dear Ministry of Education, I am writing to express my gratitude for an exceptional teacher at Riverside Primary School. Miss Mei-Lin Tan taught me English composition 5 years ago when I was struggling academically and emotionally due to my parents' divorce. Miss Tan stayed after school to help me, recommended books that changed my perspective, and never gave up on me even when I was determined to fail. She saw potential in me that no one else did. I am now studying journalism at NUS and working as a freelance writer. My work was recently featured in the Straits Times. None of this would have been possible without Miss Tan's patience and belief in me. Please ensure that teachers like Miss Tan receive the recognition they deserve. Sincerely, Brandon Tan, Class of 2019. I read the letter 3 times before the truth sank in. There were 2 Brandon Tans. The boy who'd written this letter, my former student from 5 years ago, had become a successful young journalist. The current Brandon, the one who'd been arrested, was a different child entirely with the same name. My hands shook as I realized the cosmic irony. While I was being investigated for supposedly failing one Brandon Tan, another Brandon Tan had been publicly praising my teaching in a letter to the ministry. But the revelation came too late. The investigation had already concluded. My reputation was damaged. The media had moved on to other stories, leaving behind a trail of questions about my competence that would follow me for years. The final blow came in November when Principal Lim called me to her office for what she called a career development conversation. Mei-Lin, she began, her tone gentler than usual, the investigation found no evidence of wrongdoing on your part. However, the ministry has expressed concern about teacher stress and burnout affecting student outcomes. I sat perfectly still, waiting for the hammer to fall. They're recommending that you take a sabbatical to pursue professional development. Full pay, of course. Perhaps some courses in child psychology or alternative teaching methods. A sabbatical. Educational code for get out of here until people forget about the scandal. How long? I asked. 1 semester, starting after the December holidays. I nodded numbly. 6 months away from teaching. 6 months to figure out who I was if I wasn't Mei-Lin, the perfect teacher. This isn't a punishment, Principal Lim continued. It's an opportunity for growth. When you return, you'll be refreshed and equipped with new strategies. But we both knew the truth. I was being quietly removed while everyone pretended it was for my own good. The last day of term arrived, with tropical rain that matched my mood. I packed up my classroom while the sound of children's laughter echoed from the void deck below, other people's students having fun while I contemplated the wreckage of my career. My carefully organized teaching materials went into boxes that would sit in storage for 6 months. My bulletin boards were stripped bare. The plants I'd nurtured for years were distributed to other teachers who promised to care for them. As I took down the small wooden cross that hung beside my desk, a gift from my grandmother years ago, I remembered her words when she gave it to me, Lord, protect her and guide her. Teaching is holy work. Holy work. The phrase now felt like mockery. What was holy about failing a student so badly he turned to drugs? What was sacred about a profession that measured worth by test scores and performance reviews? I drove home through the humid Singapore evening, the cross sitting on my passenger seat like an accusation. My HDB flat felt smaller than ever, filled with the ghost of the confident teacher I used to be. The sabbatical began with a crushing weight of purposelessness. For the first time in my adult life, I had nowhere to go in the morning, no lessons to plan, no papers to grade. The freedom felt like falling. I spent the first 2 weeks sleeping until noon, then wandering around Singapore with no destination. The city's efficiency and order, things I'd always admired, now seemed to mock my chaos. Everyone had purpose except me. My parents called daily, their concern wrapped in gentle questions about my professional development opportunity. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth about Brandon's arrest, the investigation, the way I'd been quietly pushed aside. By the third week, I was spending entire days in shopping malls, sitting in food courts watching other people live their normal lives. Families sharing meals, students studying for exams, office workers taking quick lunches between meetings. Everyone busy and purposeful while I drifted like debris. One afternoon, sitting in the Orchard Road food court, I overheard a conversation at the next table. "Teaching is such a noble profession," one woman said to her friend. "My daughter's teacher is amazing. Really makes a difference in children's lives." I got up and left before she could say more. The turning point came in January, 2 months into my sabbatical. I was walking through my neighborhood void deck when I saw a familiar figure hunched over homework at one of the concrete tables. It was Priya, one of my former students, struggling with what looked like a mathematics assignment. "Miss Tan." She looked up with the brightening smile that had always warmed my heart. "What are you doing here?" "Just walking," I said, sitting across from her. "How's school?" Her expression dimmed. "Hard. The new teacher is nice, but she teaches differently. I don't understand the math." Looking at Priya's work, I saw immediately what was confusing her. The methodology was sound, but presented in a way that didn't match her learning style. Without thinking, I started explaining the concept, using visual aids I sketched on a napkin. "Oh." Priya's face lit up with understanding. "That makes sense now. You always explain things so clearly, Miss Tan." As I helped her work through several more problems, something inside me began to stir. This was what I loved about teaching. The moment when confusion cleared and understanding dawned. Not the performance reviews or perfect lesson plans, but the simple joy of helping a child learn. "Miss Tan," Priya said, as she packed up her books, "are you coming back to school soon? We miss you." "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I hope you do. You're the best teacher I ever had." Walking home that evening, I carried Priya's words like a small light in the darkness. Maybe I wasn't the failure I'd convinced myself I was. Maybe one struggling student didn't negate years of successful teaching. Maybe worth wasn't measured solely by perfect outcomes. That night, for the first time in months, I opened my laptop and began to write. Not lesson plans or official reports, but thoughts about teaching, about purpose, about the difference between success and meaning. "What makes a good teacher?" I typed. "Is it perfect test scores, zero behavioral problems, universal parent approval? Or is it something harder to measure? The willingness to keep trying, to see potential where others see problems, to believe in children even when they can't believe in themselves." The words flowed like water after a drought. Page after page of reflection on what I'd learned, what I'd lost, what I hoped to rediscover. I wrote until dawn, my fingers cramped and my eyes burning, but my heart lighter than it had been in months. The next day, I did something I hadn't done since the scandal broke. I went to church. I'd walked past New Creation Church hundreds of times, but never visited. My grandmother had taken me to church as a child, but somewhere in the pursuit of academic achievement, I'd stopped making time for spiritual matters. The service was already underway when I slipped into a back pew, hoping to remain invisible. The pastor was speaking about identity, how we often confuse what we do with who we are. "God doesn't love you because you're successful," he said, his voice carrying across the small sanctuary. "Jesus has already paid the price for your forgiveness, which makes you valuable in his eyes. We're kings, a royal priesthood in God's eyes." The words hit me like lightning. Royal? Valuable? I'd spent my entire life trying to earn love, approval, worth through achievement. Perfect grades, perfect teaching evaluations, perfect professional reputation. But what happened when the performance faltered? Who was I when I wasn't the best? After the service, I sat in my car in the church parking deck, tears streaming down my face. Not the desperate tears of failure, but cleansing tears of recognition. I'd been carrying a burden I was never meant to bear alone. Over the following weeks, I began attending church regularly. Not for social reasons or professional networking, but because I was hungry for something beyond myself. The pastor had a gift for making ancient truths feel relevant. God doesn't waste our struggles, he said one Sunday. He uses them to teach us about grace, about dependence, about the difference between earning and receiving. I started reading the Bible, really reading it, not just the children's stories I'd learned in Sunday school decades ago. The words of Jesus particularly struck me. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Rest. When was the last time I'd truly rested, not from exhaustion, but from the constant pressure to prove myself? I joined a small group Bible study with women from the church. At first I was reluctant to share my struggles. What if they judged me for my professional failures? But I discovered a group of women who'd all faced their own crises of identity and worth. I thought my worth came from being the perfect mother, shared Mrs. Wu, a banker whose daughter had struggled with mental health issues. When she attempted suicide, I realized I'd been measuring my success by her happiness instead of trusting God with both our lives. Their stories helped me see my own situation differently. Maybe Brandon's struggles weren't a reflection of my failure as a teacher. Maybe I couldn't control outcomes the way I'd always believed. Maybe my worth wasn't tied to my professional performance. In March, something unexpected happened. I received a call from the church asking if I'd be interested in helping with the church's tutoring program for underprivileged children. We have students from all backgrounds, he explained. Many are struggling academically and could use someone with your expertise. I'm not sure I'm the right person, I said, my confidence still fragile. My last semester didn't go well. Mei-Lin, he said gently. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of it. These children need someone who understands struggle, not someone who's never failed. The tutoring program met twice a week at the church. 25 children aged 8 to 16, from families dealing with poverty, divorce, language barriers, and academic challenges. Everything I'd once feared as a threat to my perfect teaching record. But something miraculous happened in that classroom. Without the pressure of performance reviews, test scores, and administrative expectations, I rediscovered why I'd become a teacher in the first place. I watched struggling readers discover the joy of a good story. I helped math-phobic students realize they were actually quite capable with numbers. I listened to teenage worries and offered encouragement. Miss, one of the secondary school students said after I'd helped him with an English essay, you should be a teacher. I am a teacher, I replied. No, I mean a real teacher, in a real school. You're too good to just be helping us. Too good to just be helping them. The comment made me realize how warped my perspective had become. When had helping struggling children become just anything? When had I started measuring the value of teaching by the prestige of the institution rather than the needs of the students? The revelation about Mei-Lin Tan came in April, 4 months before I was scheduled to return to school. I was at the neighborhood coffee shop when I saw him. Not the 13-year-old Brandon who'd been arrested, but the 18-year-old Brandon who'd written the letter praising my teaching. He was sitting alone at a corner table, reading a thick book and taking notes. Brandon? I approached tentatively, unsure if he'd remember me. His face lit up with recognition. Miss Tan, what a surprise. He stood and bowed slightly, the polite gesture I'd tried to instill in all my students years ago. What are you reading? I asked, gesturing toward his book. Research for an article I'm writing about education reform, he said proudly. Actually, about how one teacher can change a student's entire trajectory. We talked for over an hour. Brandon told me about his university studies, his internship at the Straits Times, his plans to become an investigative journalist. But more importantly, he told me about the impact of our teacher-student relationship years ago. You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, he said. When my parents divorced, I was angry and ready to give up on everything. You didn't let me. You stayed after school, recommended books, helped me find my voice through writing. I just did what any teacher would do, I said. No, he replied firmly. You did what the best teachers do. You saw potential where others saw problems. As we talked, the irony of the past year became crystal clear. While I'd been tormented by guilt over failing one Brandon Tan, another Brandon Tan had been succeeding beyond either of our dreams because of our relationship years earlier. Tan, he said, as we prepared to part ways, I heard about the incident at your school last year. The boy with my name, who got arrested. I tensed, waiting for his reaction. I want you to know, what happened to him wasn't your fault. Some seeds take years to grow. Some students need different kinds of help, but that doesn't diminish the good you've done for others. How can you be so sure? Because you changed my life. And if you changed mine, you've probably changed others in ways you'll never know. That evening, I called Principal Lim to discuss my return to school. Mei-Lin, she said, and I heard relief in her voice. I was hoping you'd call. We need to talk about next year. I'm ready to come back, I said. But I need to know, is there still a place for me at Riverside Primary? Of course there is. You're one of our most dedicated teachers. The sabbatical has given you time to recharge, and we're excited to have you back. What about the investigation? The scandal? Ancient history, she said firmly. The ministry was satisfied with our procedures. The media has moved on, and frankly the school hasn't been the same without you. We discussed details, which class I'd be assigned, new initiatives to implement, support systems for struggling students. I returned to Riverside Primary in August with a heart fundamentally changed. My new class of primary, 5 students included several who'd been labeled challenging by previous teachers. Instead of seeing them as threats to my perfect record, I saw them as opportunities for grace. Good morning, class, I said on the first day, looking at 28 eager and apprehensive faces. I'm Miss Tan, and I'm here to learn with you. Don't you mean teach us? Asked a boy in the front row. I'll do that too, I smiled. But I've learned that the best teachers are also students. We grow together. The education reforms that had once terrified me became adventures in discovery. Peer evaluations became opportunities to learn from colleagues rather than threats to my competence. Struggling students became my favorite challenges instead of reflections of my inadequacy. 3 months into the new school year, I received another letter. This one was from the mother of Alex, a boy in my class who had severe ADHD and a history of behavioral problems. Dear Miss Tan, I wanted you to know that Alex comes home excited about school for the first time in years. He says you understand him and help him feel smart instead of stupid. Yesterday he told me he wants to be a teacher like you when he grows up. Thank you for seeing my son's potential instead of just his problems. With gratitude, Mrs. Krishnan. I pinned the letter to my bulletin board next to the wooden cross from my grandmother. Not as evidence of my competence, but as a reminder of grace, undeserved favor that works through imperfect people to accomplish perfect purposes. 6 months later, I stood at my classroom window during lunch break, looking out at the playground where children ran and laughed and learned together. The concrete blocks of Singapore's HDB estates stretched to the horizon, each window representing a life, a family, a story still being written. My phone buzzed with a text from the church tutoring program. Miss Mei-Lin, can you help me with my English essay tonight? I want to write about forgiveness. Melanie, I smiled, remembering the angry 15-year-old who joined our program 6 months ago, convinced she was too stupid for school. Now she was writing essays about forgiveness and planning to pursue social work. That evening, I sat in my apartment grading papers, not with the frantic perfectionism of my past, but with a heart full of gratitude for work that mattered. Each misspelled word was an opportunity to teach. Each creative answer revealed a unique mind. Each struggling student was a chance to plant seeds that might not bloom for years. My phone rang. It was Brandon Tan, the journalist. Miss Tan, he said excitedly, I wanted you to be the first to know. I just got accepted to graduate school for investigative journalism. Full scholarship. Brandon, that's wonderful, and I'm dedicating my thesis to you. It's about how education transforms lives, but also how setbacks can be setups for greater purpose. Would you be willing to be interviewed? I'd be honored. After we hung up, I walked to my window and looked out at the concrete stars of Singapore, the lights in thousands of HDB windows that had once seemed so lonely. Now they looked like what they'd always been, evidence of lives being lived, dreams being pursued, grace being discovered in the most ordinary places. I opened my Bible to the verse that had become my anchor. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Perfect in weakness, not despite my failures, but through them. Not when I had it all together, but when I admitted I never would. The weight was gone, the pressure was lifted, the performance was over, and for the first time in my adult life, I was truly free to teach, not for approval or achievement, but for love.